And we are here. That's right.
There we go. Oh,
Well,
backwards.
welcome. Yeah, we're backwards. That's because I came in first. That's why.
Who's on first?
So, what's going on, everybody? Welcome. As you can see, we are not live. This is a recording. We are
Mm-hmm.
from the future. In the future, you must donate all of your monies to us.
$13,000 banners for non-existent festival dates.
Is that festival ever going to happen?
No,
Why not?
no. Do I have to make a list?
Ooh, ooh,
Ding, ding,
ooh,
ding, 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 ding.
ooh,
Anyway,
ooh.
you're right though. We are not live. We're gonna pretend that we are though, and we're gonna play it off as if we are, even though we're not gonna see any of you happy people in the comments, which is gonna be a real shame.
But maybe we'll drop in on Friday and say hello.
That's right.
So, before we get started, cue it up. You know what I want to hear.
Bingo, bang, bongo. Here we go.
Here it is.
It's time for dad jokes.
I had a good one, but it's probably not appropriate for the show. So, I'm going to not tell that one. I'm not going to tell that one. It's not good. How did the dog survive the flood? Because it was a good boy.
No, no. I can't give you that one. No,
Doesn't matter. I take it. I take.
can't do it.
Good
If you were
boy.
trying to make like a '90s, like early 2000s
A
joke, where like
good boy.
"booey" or something like that, I guess I could see it, but not no.
It's
As
not the
is,
90s anymore, though.
no, it isn't.
It's not the 90s. It's the early 2000s. That's what it is.
It sure is.
Look, there's a cat.
There's a cat.
That's probably the cat was like, "Hey, that dad joke was fantastic."
I think she meant to attack me over it. I don't know. It's hard to say with her.
Well, I've been trying to like subconsciously plant that in their brains to attack you when I tell dad jokes.
Well, they attack me anyway. I mean, I get clawed up and scratched all the time just for fun because that's what they do. So,
That's what cats do.
cats.
Cats. So, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 224. If you are on the Anchor platform hearing our audio onlys, I uploaded some more stuff today and I'm going to keep uploading as the
Ooh.
days progress till we get all of our episodes up, including these. These are going to be a bit more of a process, but it'll be good. We'll get them up so you guys can have the audio only stuff. I'm on episode like 127. We're in Crumb's territory there. We got a lot of those guests. Anton Clark, I think, was the last
Mhm.
episode that I uploaded. So, Anchor, you guys got like 3 new episodes today. So go check up on that, and we will have more. Well, they're not new, but they're new. They're new on the Anchor platform. So,
Nostalgia. Go re-listen for the nostalgia.
and to hear us tell great jokes and have lots of fun with our guests, because our
That's right.
guests love us. We always make our guests feel like $1,000,000, not
S-
$20.
Speaking of guests, you were a guest recently on the Monday podcast.
I
So for
was a
anybody who
guest.
missed that, go back and re-listen after the show's over. Don't listen to it now. You're watching the show. Stay where you're at.
Stay no,
But
don't you dare.
later on, go back and listen to
Yes,
Let's Talk About This on Spreaker, and we talk about anime.
we did, and it was a great conversation. Thank you
It
for
was.
having
It
me.
was pretty good.
It was a great one. We had a good one. Hopefully, you go watch some animes.
Hmm.
Today, we are talking about the Antediluvian period. I know we've done the flood stuff before, but I'm just fascinated by it. I am, however, annoyed that there's not more flood stuff
Hmm.
out there. There's not a lot of flood history out there. I mean, I get it, right? It ain't making me
Yeah.
laugh, but I get it. The simple fact that it's flooded, things are destroyed. Ha ha, chuckle barn. Now, however, I will say this: the majority of flood information or antediluvian information I have is from like the Old Testament and books around the Old Testament. There's not too many other sources that I could find. I'm sure there's like some Hopi Indian stuff and things like that, which hopefully we'll get into. I don't know what Spider has planned, but let's get into this whole shebang right now. So, what the antediluvian period actually refers to is this is the time before the ancient flood that pretty much wiped out multiple civilizations, except for, I want to say, maybe 100 people. And we will be covering multiple cultures and also giving brief discussions regarding their flood myth and the time before. Now, obviously, the first place we have to look, because I think that this place is the obvious one. I mean, I don't think anybody ever heard of the flood outside of the Bible. I know I didn't, and I'm not talking about Indian cultures or other countries, but I'm talking about us, Americans. I think
Hmm.
we know the flood from Genesis 6 through 9. It basically talks about a man named Noah, and he's contracted by God to build an ark for his family, and two of every animal are supposed to go in with it. Now, because of mankind's wickedness and lawlessness, God decrees that this punishment has to happen. Now, the idea of the wickedness itself, however, is up for debate. There's two schools of thought because of this. The first one revolves around something we've talked about before, and that is the fallen angels and the Nephilim and the giants and all of that. The other actually centers on bloodlines intertwining between Seth's and Adam's. So that's another one where a lot of people
Hmm.
kind of, you're either on the Nephilim fence or you're on the no, they were human. It didn't happen. There was no Nephilim. There was no mating of angels and man. It was Seth. Seth's bloodline was the sons of man, and Adam's bloodline was the sons of God, and that's it. And they intermingled, and they got wicked. I don't know. There's good evidence for both if you're looking for different books like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees. We'll cover all that.
Hmm.
But just to read a little bit of Genesis 6. Now it had occurred when humanity had started to increase on the surface of the ground, and daughters had been born to them, meaning man. The sons of the Elohim saw the daughters of the human, that they were very good looking, so they took wives for themselves from any whom they chose. Now, in this instance, this is from the literal concordant Old Testament. I have multiple copies of the Bible, so in different translations. The word in this case, Elohim, is lowercase. And for those of you that have read the Bible and read scripture, Elohim is like a lesser God, and the bigger E of Elohim is God himself. So in this one, they refer to it like as judges or arbiters. So that's what they mean by the word Elohim. And it's interesting to note because if you read, I believe it's Second Kings, when they're talking about Solomon and worshiping other Elohim, the E is lowercase in that as well, meaning other gods, but meaning inferior gods. Whether there was other gods or not is a whole thing up for discussion. Those might have been demons, that sort of thing. But we can talk about that at some point. The King James Version, though, says there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of man, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So you basically have two different scriptures to this. The word giants isn't in the little Old Testament. However, it is in the King James Version, which is kind of interesting because the King James Version doesn't have the best history because King James himself doesn't have the best history as a human being. So you got to kind of, look into that and figure out what you're doing. So the cause of this flood is just wickedness of man overall. In the Watchers aspect, it is these beings that came down, Semyaza and Azazel and all these other angels came down, or messengers, watchers, mated with the daughters of man and had giants. Well, the giants then ended up eating whatever they could find: cattle, birds, fish, people, each other. It was just a very lawless, wickedness time. And the blood of man cries out to God and says, do we get no justice? Do we get no peace, no everlasting atonement for this? God says, okay, I got to flood the place. But what happened in those times before that flood? You had angels that were teaching about makeup, astronomy, astrology, how to make weapons, swords, shields, that sort of thing, and all of this supposed heavenly knowledge, right? That shouldn't have been taught. Now, one thing, and this just came to me while I was sitting here, if that was heavenly knowledge being taught, makeup and swords and shields and things like that, what use did they need of that? If they were telling of the printing of faces in astrology, I can understand astrology and astronomy and things like that, stars, movements, planets, all that jazz. But weapons and swords and shields, makeup, what would you need that for?
Now, there's an interesting parallel too. Um, when you look at this and you think of the wickedness idea, and if you take just the Nephilim version of the story, then and you distill it down into the essence of it, it's basically a problem. It's a mating problem. It's a sexual activity problem. It's like you're
Mhm.
not supposed to be mingling these people together. And if you compare that with an earlier source, with the Sumerian sources, you come across a very interesting bit of where it's almost the same. Where in the original Sumerian sources, where some of this may be based on, we're not sure. I mean, we can speculate all day, but in the Sumerian version that eventually became the Babylonian Enuma Elish, however you say it, I don't think I got it right, but anyway, the Babylonian creation epic, um, the gods were upset because they had created mankind as these laborers, as this basically slave race to do what needed to be done, and they treated them well mostly, but they made them to do work for them. And one of the two brothers who was in charge, um, Enlil, I believe, he was irritated because he couldn't sleep because in while he was trying to sleep, all he could hear outside his windows were the humans making more humans. And so again, it's a mating issue. And so he decided that, oh, there's a natural disaster coming. We're not going to tell them about it. We're going to let it wipe them out and start from scratch. And his brother Enki says, no, no, we can't do that. And he warns a select few that are basically the equivalent to Noah, Utnapishtim, and he says, hey, this thing's coming. The rest of my bros over here don't want to tell you, but I'm telling you now, get some loyal people, get out of there while you can. So it's interesting that both of those primary stories revolve around some kind of mating behavior, some kind of sexual activity. And whether it's with spiritual beings or whether it's with other humans, it's the point is more that it's almost like a moral lesson that's deep seated in there. Don't go around doing what you do all the time. It's almost one of those things where they're trying to tell you, maybe you should, be a little more Puritan in what you're doing. But that gets into a more, strict worldview and things. And I don't know, it doesn't mesh well with today's society, I suppose. But it's an interesting point to make that everybody was wiped out for these kind of indiscretions.
And I think too, with places like the Library of Alexandria being utterly destroyed, it's hard to get a good consensus of what flooded and what didn't.
Hmm.
Supposedly it was localized, supposedly it was worldwide. If it was worldwide, then other cultures had the same situational problem. This is coming. We got to get these people here and do this. China has flood myths. Everybody has a flood myth, pretty much. All the old civilizations have flood myths. And I think if we had something like the Library of Alexandria still in existence today, we might have a better understanding of exactly what happened before, what happened during, and what happened after. Because I'm sure people wrote stuff down. I wouldn't put it past people to write in any way they could. The Book of Jubilees actually talks about this uh, when in reference to the Watchers. It says, "And he, Canaan, found a writing which former generations had carved on the rock. He
Mm.
read it that was thereon, and he transcribed it, and sinned owning to it, for it contained the teachings of the Watchers in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun and moon and stars and all the signs in heaven. And he wrote it down and said nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak, lest Noah be angry with him on account of it."
Hmm.
Second Enoch. Oh, did you have something to say? I heard you.
Well, I was going to point out
Good.
that's one of the many reasons why that was left out, why it's apocryphal, because it's controversial. Like it
Yeah,
kind of
sure is.
throws some gears in the official story of things, and so you have to wonder, well, were there things from above that were kept from us, or was there something else, some previous society, like the Sumerian stories and things like that? So it's an interesting point that these things were left out, but they were still supposedly written by someone around that time.
Yes. Now, I want to say something too. We did our show last week on alchemy, If you guys missed it, please when this is over, go back and listen to it. But Hermes Trismegistus supposedly got one of those pillars because what they did was they made two pillars. They made one to withstand fire and one to withstand water. This way, the knowledge could be passed down and it could transcend into future generations. Well, obviously, the water one got destroyed, but the fire one kept. And so Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes Thrice Great, finds this pillar, and thus alchemy is born. So if you have not read or watched that episode, please go back, watch it after this episode. Do not let us catch you watching stopping this episode. We'll know. And we'll come to your house and we'll give you a stern lecture.
One more point too. I'm not gonna, because mostly what we're gonna be talking about is like the biblical sources and some of the more supposed mythological. I don't want to offend anybody by calling them myth, because we don't know. But the antediluvian period, it corresponds relatively. I don't know if it's relatively well, but alongside an actual time period of scientific value. It's called the LGP, the last glacial period. And I looked this up because everybody knows me. I got to throw in a little bit of science. I got to throw the science in at everything. And it lasted from the end of what's called the Eemian period, which is the end of the really truly catastrophic ice ages, into the Younger Dryas. And if you remember from a few shows ago, we talked about how the Younger Dryas, in that special that we watched from Graham Hancock, that there was a huge sudden change on the planet. There was a huge, it was both a sudden heating and then a sudden cooling both at once. And those kind of things could cause massive flooding. So the scientific record supports it in a way that there was massive flooding across the planet, depending on where the glaciers were at different times. Some places weren't overrun with glaciers, of course, so they weren't as bad, and you could have had survivors in different areas or at great heights. So it's just an interesting little point. I wanted to make sure I brought it up, that there is some scientific evidence supporting what happened during the antediluvian period.
Fantastic. Also, if we look at Second Enoch, there's actually three Enoch books. The first book is the one everybody knows: Semyaza, Watchers, Mating, Giants, Blood Eating, Flood. Holla at your boy. 2 Enoch, though, the Slavic book, as it is called, Slavic Enoch, talks of a pre-flood knowledge in a more positive aspect. And it goes on to state, and you take the books which you yourself have written and give them the books in your handwriting, and they will read them, and they will acknowledge me as the creator of everything, and let them distribute the books in your handwriting, children to children, and family to family, and kinsfolk to kinsfolk. And I will give you Enoch, my mediator, my archistrage, Michael, on account of your handwritings and handwritings of your fathers Adam and Seth, and Enos, and Canaan, and Melalel, and Arid, your father, and they will not be destroyed until the final age. So I have commanded my angels, Aruk and Paruk, whom I have appointed on the earth as their guardians, so that they might preserve them, so that they might not perish in the future flood, which I shall create in your generation. So I want to point something out too. When it says, I will give you Enoch, my mediator, and my archistrage Michael, he's giving you two people there, not just one. I don't want people to get confused and say, oh, you're saying Enoch is Michael. No, it's just the way it's worded. The way things are worded sometimes due to translation errors makes it sound a little stiff. So you just have to kind of put it in there yourself and say, okay, he's talking about two different beings, obviously Archangel Michael and the Metatron himself, Enoch. So I just wanted to put that out there. The interesting aspect of this, because a lot of the apocryphal writings have extra angels in them that the original Old Testament does not have. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows Michael. Everybody knows Raphael. I think he might be in that one too. Yep.
Samael
is in that too. There's
as
very
usual.
few. There's very few angels that are actually in the Old Testament
Mm.
compared to the apocryphal texts, like the Book of Enoch, or like Jubilees, or all of these other books that they left out. And we'll have to get into that conversation one day of books that were left out of the Bible itself due to the Council of Nicaea. We have talked about the Nag Hammadi before. I know that we've talked about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but we haven't really given an in-depth breakdown on the Council of Nicaea itself. And I think that'd be a very interesting conversation. So we'll have to put that one in the old cap for maybe 2 weeks from the Friday you guys listen to this show. See what I did there? Magic. But yeah, you have all of these church fathers: Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, and they're passing these writings down from them, because we have to think that Adam up to Noah, there was whole generations of people between those two that didn't experience any flooding. It wasn't until Noah's day when the flooding actually happened. So I found that to be very fascinating. I think too, when we look at biblical text, because a lot of people will sit back and say, well, that's the Bible and there's no way that that could be true because it's written by man and it's blah, blah, then and it's been translated and errors and
Mhm.
errors and errors. But when you have multiple sources of floods, like Spider was just talking about science,
Mhm.
you got to, at some point you have to put it away of, okay, I don't want to believe in this because this is a biblical thing and I'm not religious. But I don't think you have to be religious to read the Bible. I don't think there's any laws that you can't pick it up and read it. And a lot of people will put it up as, oh, it's all contradictory and it's all wickedness and evil and then taking over.
Well, that's the thing about it too. It's like any other, like there are a lot of spiritual books out there, and we're going to get into that in. We're also going to explore that on the Saturday Spiritualist show. Eventually, we're going to get into a lot of the books themselves and try to examine some of their origins and things. Because some things, like the Mormon book, okay, there's some things that are kind of like, this doesn't quite ring out right. But a lot
Yeah.
of
Oh,
other
sorry.
ones, you can do a lot of fact checking, and
Mhm.
while there's not a lot of guarantees, you can find a lot of correspondence and a lot of things that match up with things that were written in those books. And maybe, yeah, they were written after the events happened, but a lot of it was based on things that people knew as commonplace. A lot of the historical stuff was pretty common at the time, so people knew that happened. Just because we don't necessarily have evidence for it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Um,
True.
and it's just interesting because there's a lot of history, especially in like the Old Testament. It's like you and I have always said, because we've had this talk before. The Old Testament is basically a history book.
Yes.
It's basically a history book and a manual for the people who lived around that time, because survival was kind of a problem around the time, like with Moses and going in the desert. Like there was a lot of rules and things, and there was the whole reason was so that you don't kill over, so you don't kill your whole families. So it was survival stuff. It wasn't just you know and it wasn't until after the New Testament came out. The New Testament was a different spiritual tone. It was a different direction, and it was supposed to be. It tells you right out the gate that it's different. It's and people try to combine the two into one thing, and yeah, they're included together, but you have to look at them separately. That's just
Yes.
how it is.
Yeah. Yeah, you really do, because you're looking at it from one civilization in the Old Testament. You're not looking at from multiple civilizations, even though Persians are in it, Babylonians are in it. Sure, but that's
and
part
if
of that history.
and if you call yourself a modern Christian, and I don't want to insult anybody here, but it's going to sound like I'm kind of calling people out, but I'm not trying to. If you call yourself a modern Christian, the New Testament tells you what the Old Testament was, and that you're not supposed to go back and follow all those rules.
Yes.
I mean, sure, the Ten Commandments are stuff that makes sense. Don't go killing people. Don't go envying people. Don't do this. That makes sense. But the rest of it is a survival manual. And the New Testament tells you, don't worry about that. This is the new way to go. That was important at the time. Remember to respect it. But that's that. This is now.
Right.
And if you're a modern religious person, you're not supposed to go back and read Leviticus and be like, suffer not a witch to live. You're not supposed to do that stuff anymore. It's not as important anymore. That was then. This is now. And it tells
Right.
you that right up front.
It literally will tell you to, and there was reasons. It wasn't
Yeah.
like these things were being said just so that they could get away with persecution. That's not how that works. And a lot of people are so quick to jump in and say, "Oh, look, it says you can beat your slave and this, that, and third." And they don't read the whole thing. They don't read the history. They don't read anything that goes on. All they do is they want to pinpoint that. They want to cherry pick. But then they'll blame and I'm not talking about like Christians will cherry pick, and so will atheists. They'll cherry
Mm.
pick. Both sides of them will cherry pick. Oh, well, but you're slave. You got slaves, but you don't understand. It was that was the times. There was things that happened that was history, and every nation has had slaves at some point. That's history. That's what it is. And so we get caught up in that, but we miss the hidden stuff. The
Mhm.
hidden stuff is the most important part of the Bible. It's not the stuff that people cherry pick, it's the hidden knowledge. That's why very few people can truly understand it, because it's hidden knowledge. It's gnosis. It's
Mhm.
hidden stuff. And when you really read it and you read about things like, Solomon's temple and his throne, and supposedly his throne actually moved. It was robotic. It's very fascinating, but a lot of people won't do that. They won't take the time to actually read it. They'll just say, "Oh no, no, I don't read that book. It's that kind of
And me, I'm not a religious person. I mean,
at
we
all."
we both we have it established that I'm not a very religious person. I have a very different path in how I view things spiritually, but I can still look at that and I can be like, okay, logically, I know what it's saying here. This is Old
Right.
Testament stuff. This is historical. This is how you were supposed to be at the time. This is that. I look at the New Testament stuff. I said, okay, this is the new direction, and they say right there that
Yeah.
that's the new direction. It's pretty clear, but if you don't read it, you won't know. And a lot of people don't. They'll just look at the passages and they'll again go, Leviticus suffered on which to live. Oh, the tattoos. Oh, the shellfish. Oh, this. Oh, this. Oh, this. And it's like, okay. And there are some pretty diehard Orthodox, supposed Christian folks and churches out there that think that Old Testament is literal as well, and they're kind of giving it a bad name. It's not entirely unfounded for some people to be upset about it. But those people you got to reach too. You got to be like, hey, you know what? Reread that. Reread it.
My father always told me, read the before and read the after.
Yeah,
You're going to
and
pick
that's
a
basically what it
passage,
is.
read the before, and then read the after, because you got to it has to make sense. You
Mhm.
know, you could, for instance, the unpardonable sin. It's not what people think it is. It's a whole different thing, but people just want to click to it. They want to say the blaspheming of the Holy Spirit. It doesn't mean what they think it means. It's not what they think it is, and I'm not going to get into it. That's a whole religious conversation that
Yeah,
could
we've
probably
already
get
kind
us
of got a
covered.
little bit off the point though, but it was a good
100%.
discussion.
No,
It
no,
was a good
fantastic.
discussion.
So I want to bring up something else. Arians, because yeah, we're turning into that kind of podcast. Yeah, that's right.
Ooh, some people are gonna be
Spooky.
like, "Let me put my anger head on, my
Yeah,
anger
anger hat
hat,
on.
my anger hat."
So Hitler, no, I'm kidding. Everybody knows Aryans from Hitler. All right. A lot of people don't know where Aryan actually comes from. They just immediately jump into, oh, Aryans. And this is like to those trashy neo Nazis. You guys are trash, by the way. That took the word Aryan and used it to mean white person, but it does not. Actually, the Aryan refers to a race of people that had advanced knowledge and greatly influenced Europeans and went on to become their kings and priests. Now you're like,
Mhm.
well, where do they come from? Good point. I'll bring it up. The word itself was used for a far more nefarious purpose during World War II, right? Blonde haired, blue eyed, all this craziness.
Like everything else Hitler did, he took something
Borrowed it,
and he made
stole
it
it,
bad. Like the
stole it.
swastika, it's still
Swastika.
used in India today
Yeah.
as a peaceful symbol of the four elements, the 4 points, and a lot of other things. He took that, made it a terrible symbol. He took the Aryan idea, made it a terrible
Yeah.
idea. All this stuff was not a problem until he made it a problem.
And now you can't, and it's not even the same
Mhm.
facing swastika. It's actually the other way around. So it's not even, he took it and then just flipped it and was like,
Yep.
started yelling loud things in German, and people loved him for it. Same thing with Aryan, because Aryans actually descend from Central Asia, which is today's Iran, and before that, Sumeria. So they come from these two places. And I've often had this conversation with people. I said Iranians are actually Aryans. That's who Aryans were. They were that. They were those people. Because Iranians, for the most part, aren't Arabs. A lot of people think that just because Iran is in, you know, Arabic lands means that they're Arabic. No, they're not. They're not Arabic. I'm not saying that there's not some people that live in Iran that that aren't or that are or no, that aren't Arabic. There's plenty of Arabs that live in Iran, but for the most
Mhm.
part, Iran's people are actually Aryans. They're the people that originally lived there, and then they went out. And some say that the Vikings are descendants of Aryans because they moved out from Persia after after the Arab conquest of those lands, and they just further drove them west. So they
Mhm.
further drove them west into Europe, which would have then been into Germany. And there's records of Germany actually or Vikings meeting with different peoples of Arabics. I mean, everybody's seen the 13th Warrior. Ha, fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, go see it. It's a good. Or
The book is
Brent.
much better, by the
The
way.
book is fantastic. I've read the book too. Michael Crichton. Yeah.
Like all of his books, the movies are mostly okay, except for a couple that are stinkers. But the books are always so much better.
Eaters of the Dead. Go read it. Eaters of the Dead. Yeah, I read that. I got it floating around here somewhere. I think it's floating around somewhere. But yeah, so they also taught people secret knowledge. This is a reoccurring theme of pre-flooded peoples. They have this vast amount of knowledge and wisdom and experience. Whether you take it from this part of the Aryan aspect or you take it
Mhm.
from the Watchers with Semyaza and Azazel and all these other beings, they had this supreme knowledge. And if you want to take it to Islam, Islam is a little harder to find pre-flood information on because they really don't have a flood myth, so to speak. They just use the Bible's flood myth. They just use
Mhm.
Noah, Nuh, as they call him, because a lot of times with Islam, they'll change the wording and the spelling, but it'll be similar. Like Solomon is Suleiman. It's just Sullimen. I want to say, pardon me if I did not spell that right, but
It
that's what
looks
they
like
do.
Suleiman or something like
Suleiman, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
it
Exactly.
basically it's the same thing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's mostly because of the dialect. What
Mm-hmm.
they did is when they set up Islam, they based it on a regional dialect, and it's never changed since. Compared to other things, like with the Bible, we have
King
multiple
James, yeah,
translations. We have the King James, we have the King
NIV, and
Concordance, we got the NIV, we got the Living, we got all
yep,
this stuff. But
got the
Islam's like,
concordance,
no, this is what it was when they made it. This is what it's
yeah,
going to stay, and you don't change a thing. And that's what it is. And
literally,
it's cultural. It's just cultural.
you can't change a thing.
Hmm.
They will be at your doorstep if you
Oh
try
yeah,
to change a
there's
thing.
like specific like it's a death penalty
Yeah,
to try to alter the words of the prophet and stuff like that. And even though I mean, I wouldn't expect a squad to actually show up, but if you tried to do a mass production, if you tried to like rewrite the whole thing and then try to get a publisher, I think you'd have some problems.
I don't think a publisher in their right mind would take
They
it.
probably wouldn't. No, because it's such a touchy area. It's like, no, we don't want to invite that in our house, so we're not going to do that.
And the thing is, extremists have happened. Remember the Dutch cartoonist that did the
Yep.
maybe like
The
five,
thing in
five,
France,
6 years ago.
that
Yeah,
French studio that got like they went through and just blasted a bunch of people, unfortunately. People are
Ex-
serious about that kind of thing.
extremists in religion are bad for religion.
Yeah.
They're not good. It's not a good thing. And I don't want to paint all Muslims as these bad,
No, because we've got them
terrible
in the other
people.
ones too. I mean,
Yeah, of course. I
there's
mean,
actually there's Hindus that are like really not nice people.
100%,
Oh boy, like
100%.
there's some Hindus that have
Yeah.
they had basically almost a genocide of Muslims
Yep.
in a certain part of India, and so it's not just one particular thing. You can
You
get bad
have
people
you have
everywhere.
China that was exterminating Muslims crazy too. Same thing. And that's the thing people don't understand. Islam isn't just one group of people. Like the people that are doing that, the shootings and the attacks, those are extremists. Those are the
Mhm.
highly orthodox Muslims that are doing these things. These aren't I've met Muslims in day-to-day life, and they're good people. I have nothing. The thing is, you have to understand about Islam, it's very serious. It's very it's a ritualistic belief system. Praying 5 times a day, facing the east, that sort of thing. It all stems from the more orthodox ideologies, as to where if you have something like what are they called? Not the Sunnis or the Shiites, the whirling dervishes. Those are
Sufis.
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 The Sufi is a more mystic aspect of Islam. It's a fascinating study. If anybody out there gets a chance, the Sufi studies are some of the most interesting things I've ever seen. And they will just twirl and twirl and twirl because it's thought that gets them closer to God to be able to speak to Allah. So just something to take on there if you so choose. What do you have, Senior Spider? Because I've got something really interesting coming up down the pipeline.
Well, most of what I had actually we've already hit like super hard. I didn't figure we'd get to it that early. We had the science, and then we had some of the background and some of the histories. But I do want to point out too that there's some interesting stuff about the flood, about the antediluvian stories. Because again, getting back to Mesopotamia, we have Babylonian stories. We have the story of Gilgamesh.
Yep.
And Gilgamesh meets Utnapishtim, who's basically Noah, and he tells them all this stuff, and their stories continue to use that as a moral, like, hey, this is why you listen, this is why you don't just strike off on your own, because Utnapishtim was granted everlasting life because he saved the human race, basically. And he was a devout person at that. It wasn't just that he saved everybody, it was that he was devout the entire time.
Right.
So Gilgamesh goes to him because he's like, hey, I'm trying to live forever. I'm trying to become the greatest king ever. I'm the warrior king. I'm Gilgamesh. And Utnapishtim gives him these tests. He gives him the tests of the bread. And Gilgamesh fails. And he tells him, you know what? If you're not going to listen, if you're not going to understand what's being told to you, then you're never going to become a greater person. And that's kind of what a lot of these stories are about. It's all about listening and not necessarily obeying, but listening to the signs. It's paying attention. It's listening to common sense, because nobody else believed that all the rain coming was going to cause a flood. Noah was like, hey, you know what? It's going to flood bad. We're all going to be in a big heck of trouble. I'm building the boat. I don't know what you guys are doing. And he told everybody, he was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And they made fun of him. They were like, you know what? Whatever. You're building the boat, whatever.
Right.
Nothing's going to happen.
And he built it in the middle of a plain.
Yeah.
He didn't even build it like there was, trees. They took the trees down, built this giant boat, and people made fun of him during the whole time. And I can't say that I wouldn't be like, man, that dude's building a boat. I don't think I'd have made fun of him, but I've been like, man, that dude's building a boat.
It does seem a little crazy. But again, like if he's telling you, hey, this is going to happen, I'm looking at this stuff, I'm seeing, all it takes is a little bit of faith, really.
That's
just to be like, hey, you know what? If I build a boat and nothing happens, whatever, I've just got this boat, I'll take it apart. But if I build a boat and something does happen,
right,
now I got a boat.
Right.
Now I got a boat and I'm in good shape. So that's what it is. It's
that's right.
A story that's teaching you common sense to be prepared more than anything else, really, if you want to just break it down.
And a lot of the Bible is just that. It's a lot of symbolism involved that a lot of people don't get. People are like, oh, I'm going to take the plank out of my eye. The plank isn't in my eye. It's not in my... But
you can't fit a plank in your eye, you jerk.
What they're saying is, how are you going to talk bad about somebody else when you're doing the exact same thing and or worse? Fix yourself first before you go try to fix your brother of what he's doing. And that was their parables. A lot of stuff was parables that Jesus taught, and a lot of people goes over their noggin because, like you said, they jump to the negative parts of it as soon as possible. Leviticus, don't eat shellfish. Oh, you could eat it because, once again, people didn't know how to prepare shellfish. If you're like, that's the food that if people eat, you can die from that. You get sick.
It's got parasites.
Yes.
It can really, and the same thing with pork. Pork could give you trichinosis.
Chicken's the same thing.
And so they tell you, just don't eat it. Just don't eat it. You obviously don't know what you're doing, so just don't eat it. And so people think, oh, I can't eat my bacon and whatnot. Well, that's different because this is now, that was then.
Right. And that's the thing. Jesus said that was the law, and I've come to fulfill the law. But people, you know what? We're not. We go on a whole tangent about people not
That's like 5 other
understanding.
shows.
That's like 5 shows combined into one. That's like a 5-hour marathon that we'd have to rock for like charity or something. Next up, though, we're going to talk about Atlantis because I feel like we would be remiss if we did not talk about
It always
Atlantis.
revolves back around.
Always,
It's like the
always.
giant toilet bowl revolving around the Atlantis.
It was a good show until you started saying that. So
It was.
too
That
bad.
kind of made it a little bit. That
It's too
made it
bad.
toilet humor. Ha ha ha! Literal.
Quit talking crap. Oh,
Yeah,
there it
yeah.
is. So this is the lost city described by Plato in the Republic, and it was said to have sunk in the ocean. The founders of Atlantis were said to be demigods, human, half god, and the Atlanteans created a technological empire with a naval armada that rivaled many of today's superpowered nations. Atlantis was said to be made up of concentric islands separated by wide moats and linked by a canal that penetrated right to the center. These islands contained gold, silver, and other precious metals, and they also had an abundance of rare and exotic wildlife. And in the center, obviously, would have been their capital city. So you have these three. I've seen them in 3 and 5 concentric ring art pieces.
Mm.
And the capital's in the middle. This is where all the people stay. Further you get out, the more different things are have changed. But they were said to be able to generate electricity. They built flying machines. They harnessed nuclear power. Had a death ray, secrets of levitation, and they used crystals. Like the crystal energy was like real big with them, supposedly. And it was also said that when the disaster happened, when Atlantis was destroyed, that many of the Atlantean people themselves actually ventured into Egypt, Europe, and the Americans. And that's why we have the technology we do today. Nikola Tesla was said to be one of these people that was able to sort of understand the universal consciousness. And Atlantis. Now, Atlantis is what I think one of the biggest lost civilizations. You could say Mu, you could say Lemuria, you could say Shambhala, Hyperborea. You could say all these other things, but nothing has the same pop culture stuff. Nothing has the same meaning as Atlantis.
We've got Disney movies about Atlantis.
Yes.
And there's so many things. And it comes up so many places. And there's so much precedent for it, too. Like you mentioned, the Egyptians have written records talking about, oh, yeah, we had stories of Atlantis, or we traded with people who said they came from there. South America has people who came from the ocean on boats to teach them writing, to teach them agriculture, and then they left by boat back to where they came from. You had the stories of the sea peoples, who no one knows exactly who the sea peoples were. There's a lot of theories, there's a lot of ideas, but they're basically like they would come out, they would hit the coastlines, hit the islands, and they would go back to somewhere out in the ocean. Where did they come from? Did they come from a place called Atlantis? Hard to say. The legend has gotten bigger than the fact, I think, but
yes,
the facts remain that there was something there that gave some sort of bit of truth to all these stories. Something was there, and we just haven't found it yet.
And I think it's interesting you bring up the sea people because I was watching Middle East mysteries, and it's a guy that talks about stuff like that. He was talking about the sea people. Where did the sea people come from? And we have to understand, too, I think a lot of people fail to understand that we have had continental shifts, getting back into science again. Continental shifts, we've had islands split apart, we've islands sunk because of rising and lowering water levels. We've had islands completely disappear. We have Antarctica that was supposedly a lush jungle according to the Prairies map. So you have all these things. Now, what I want to do is I want to do something here because I think this is. I just got to find it first because I haven't done this in a while. All right, where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? There we go. Is it this? No, it's not that. Oh, duh, it's down here. I'm still trying to work StreamYard.
It's in the present area, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly what you know what I was looking for. Share screen. All right. Boom. There you go. I don't know if you guys know what this is. This is the Rychat structure that is in the Sahara Desert that resembles a giant bullseye. Now, supposedly this thing here, and I don't know if my co-host has ever heard this theory, but the Corolla Cross here gets great gas mileage.
Really?
No,
Wow.
yeah, that's really what this whole episode was, just an advertisement. We roped you guys in. But if you look here, the it's very similar. Can they see my mouse cursor or no?
Yeah. Yep.
Can they? You sure? Okay.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? Concentric rings.
Hmm.
Now, supposedly, this is Atlantis. This is Atlantis. A lot of people said, well, Atlantis sunk. Well, if that's the case and the water lowered, it would reveal this structure. It's a very
And
fascinating thing.
most of our major deserts are supposedly from ancient oceans. Like the Sahara it's geologically the site of an ancient ocean. And
Mhm.
it's part of the reason why, switching gears a little bit, why we're so interested in certain areas of Mars, because Mars
Mhm.
has very much similar features
Yep.
to our deserts here that had oceans. And that's how we figured out that Mars had oceans of its own, because of the way that the geology is. And so it's not outside the realm of possibility. And I would say, if I was one of those guys from one of those popular History Channel shows, I would say, wouldn't it be possible if the because the Sahara
Yeah.
was an ocean, that there was something there that sunk and then was covered with sand over a long period of time. So you would never find it, because the sand is so pervasive and it wears things down. Like sand will
Easily.
destroy
Easily.
structures.
Easily. Look at
Like
pyramids.
the damage it's done to the Sphinx in Egypt,
Yes.
the damage it does to the pyramids constantly all the
Yes.
time. They're having to do restoration all the time
Non-stop. Yes.
because of the pervasiveness of the sand, because it's gritty, it tears at stuff, it
Yeah.
cuts at stuff. It's tiny little rocks chopping away at things over
Yes.
time with every little bit of wind. So if there was something there in the middle of the Sahara and it got everything, all the water dried up and all the sand covered it up, we may never find it.
Now, I want to say that you sounded kind of sad about that too in your voice. Like,
I
we
am.
may
I am
never
kind of sad.
find it. Me
We
too.
never
Me
find
too.
it.
So 40 kilometers equates to 24 miles. And that's just that part. Atlantis could
Mhm.
have been bigger, and that just all that stuff got destroyed. Now I want to kind of talk about some. We got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the pyramid itself, because the pyramid supposedly, well, not supposedly, because it's just a theory, was built pre-flood. Built pre-flood.
Mhm.
Interesting. There's not a lot of truth to that. It's a lot of conjecture behind that, because the pyramids themselves, the word Egypt um, comes from I forget who it was. It was somebody's daughter that the place was named after. I'll get back to you guys. And I was reading furiously today before I had to go to work, but it was supposedly built for or to keep people safe from the flood, which is kind of interesting, because then that would equate to, okay, we told them about the flood that's coming in this year, so let's build this great pyramid. It's also was thought to be a treasure house for the antediluvian king Shaddad bin Ad, as I have expounded upon exponentially, because he was the leader of Iram of the Pillars, and supposedly he actually had almost the entire earth conquered. I mean, these kings lived a different life, as we
Mhm.
see from the Sumerian kings list. And what I think is, we had a disaster episode where we talked about climatic disasters,
Mhm.
and the idea that the poles shift and things shifted could have been the end of the antediluvian period in itself. Waters come, you have these great kings, these great civilizations, because if anybody's ever looked at archaeological sites, there's always the archaeological site that they're looking at. There's always cities underneath. There's always
Mhm.
something underneath,
They're
underneath,
built on
underneath,
previous.
built
It's
on previous
stacks and
cities.
stacks and
Yes.
stacks.
So what I think happens, these disasters happen, these worldwide disasters happen, and a lot of people say, we're about due for another one. No, shut up. We're not. And if we are, let's go already. I ain't got time. Um, I got, my PO doesn't like when I've been goofing around on the moon all day. No, but the interesting aspect is, that these sites all are built on other sites. They've dug and then they're like, well, what's this? Oh, this is from way before. If we look at the Great Serpent Mound, they thought the Great Serpent Mound was only like 10,000 years old. Come to find out, it's much older, and that Native Americans, as they were going through, would clean the place up because that was thought to be respectful to your ancestors by cleaning it up, and they would move on, and it was a repeating process. So they thought, oh, this looks newer. This is a newer site. Then they started finding other things, arrowheads, everything else, and they're like, wait, this is way older.
And then they said you're not allowed to find out how old it is, and they stopped everybody from checking.
And they stopped 100% everybody from checking.
Just like in Egypt.
Just like in Egypt. Is Egypt taking over America? Amerigypt? Egyptica?
Y2J?
Why I was yeah. It's time to play the game. Wrong person. So that's what we have. I think that if we keep digging, we're going to find. But I think that the problem is with mainstream archaeology. Mainstream archaeology hates anything that is not specifically rooted to either evolution or the Big Bang Theory. So anytime you propose something outside of that narrative, you're automatically cut down. And mainstream academia isn't the place. It's not the place. I think the place is probably the government, multiple governments. I mean, I don't think that we're always at war with each other. I think it's kind of like we don't get along, but we don't want. Nobody wants to push a button. Nobody's ever going to push the button. And a lot of people say, well, nah, because if you push the button, you're losing everything. And maybe there's some despot that'll do that, but I, for the most part, don't think that. I don't think the button's going to be pressed. But I think there's like a weird sort of natural agreement that anything that exposes us as a whole should not be talked about. Make fun of it, get rid of it. Don't let it get out there because, like you said, Egypt stopped it, and Great Serpent Mound stopped it. And you have all these places that are always under the control of some government entity, or you have like the Smithsonian. When I talked about giants coming in, taking bones, and I would understand like one or two instances and then being like, it sounds like a conspiracy theory. But you have multiple sources of people that said, oh yeah, the Smithsonian showed up and the bones were gone. Well, where did the bones go? And that just leads me to believe these antediluvian civilizations existed. I don't think that we were just here as cave people, just painting in caves, and all of a sudden, boom, we're intelligent. I think what happens is it's a cycle. It's like it's almost like Ragnarok, or like I'm trying to think of it's the one where everything burns and life starts again. I think it's either Buddhist or Hinduism, but there's like a thought that everything goes in cycles. So there's the destructive cycle, and then there's the rebirth cycle, and it's just a continuous cycle of things.
That's like what the Mayan calendar was all about.
It was 100%.
That's why everybody, oh no, 2012, it's all, but no, it was just that's the resetting of the calendar, and it starts again. And the Sumerian calendars were the same. Once you get to a certain point, you restart, you start a new cycle, a new age, and you go from there, because they recognized that the planet naturally goes through these life cycles.
We do that here. January to December. Then, oh, look, it's January again. Nobody's like, oh my God, what's going to happen after December? I don't know. What are we going to do? I think a lot of people get caught up in that kind of stuff. And we need to have more antediluvian history. I need more of it. So if anybody out there has it, if you got those pillars somewhere, I want to see them. You better show them to us, because this is this uncanny earth. We have kind of a right to that.
That's right. So, before we get going, we should probably prop all the different things that we've got going on.
So much stuff to prop up. My arms are tired. I'm like Atlas holding up the earth.
This episode, of course, will be Friday. I mean, we're recording it on a Wednesday, but it's going to, you guys are going to see it on a Friday.
See it on Friday.
So the next day on Saturday, we're going to have another Saturday Spiritualist. And I still haven't decided by this point what I'm going to talk about. It's kind of like I have a couple of ideas. I might talk about theosophy or thelema. I might talk about Thelema because we touched on it a little bit recently with Madame Blavatsky and stuff. So I
We've
might
talked
talk
about theosophy before, so yeah, we could.
Yeah.
You could.
Sunday, I think it's a free day still.
Yeah, I think we should just leave Sundays alone. It's not really. We need days off.
Yeah.
We have content because not really. Like it's not really a day off because I usually stream on Sundays. I won't be
there's
streaming
something.
this Sunday, but yeah, I usually stream on Sundays. Mondays I try to stream. Tuesday he streams.
Mhm.
Whatever, he streams craziness on Tuesdays. Wednesday is Wednesday, I think. Is there anything that goes on?
Wednesday's
on
a free
Wednesday?
day. Yeah, we
Wednesday's
usually
a
have a free day on Wednesday.
Wednesday. Free day on
Thursday-
Wednesday.
Monday, of course, is also the Let's Talk About This podcast. My
Oh,
next
yeah, that's right.
episode, by the
Forgot
time
about
you
that.
watch this, I'll have decided I'm talking about bowling.
Bowling. Yeah.
Bowling. And then Thursday, another episode of the Uncanny Spirits Club.
Bowling.
And then back here for another episode of This Uncanny Earth on Friday.
Yeah, I'll be back a week from today for y'all mother lovers out there. So, yeah, that's it. Y'all get some sleep. If I catch you guys watching anything else during this podcast, I will know because I will be there. You might even see us in the chat room and answering some of y'all's questions. And you'll be like, whoa, how are you guys talking to us and not typing? It's a mystery.
Paradox.
Time
stream is going to be broken.
Time stream never worked in the first place.
Oh, my Undertaker.
Anyways, you guys, take care of yourselves. Have a good Friday. Have a good weekend. And as always, why be boring when you can be uncanny? We will see you folks soon.